it is really about understanding yourself deeper and being open to the idea that other people can have their perspective too. As human beings, we're going to need to be able to think flexibly. That's where real fulfillment comes from.
Dr. Ginger Carlson is the co-founder of Mobius Dynamics and the CEO of the Multarity Project. She's an international speaker, educator, leader, and award-winning author who has presented and written widely on the topics of creativity, communication, growth, and transformation. Her work seeks to transform how we dialogue, visualize data, and ultimately build empathy and bridge divisions. Ginger, welcome to the show. So great to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So for the audience, I've connected with Ginger before a few times, once on the Resilience podcast and once as part of your projects, Ginger's projects, which we can talk about, which are very interesting. But for those who haven't met you before, perhaps you could just share a little bit about who you are and what it is you do at Multarity Project.
Sure. Yes. I am Ginger Carlson, and I'm the CEO of Mobius Dynamics and the CEO of the Multarity Project. And basically, in a nutshell, we bring people together around challenging topics, issues that they're struggling with to make sense of, and who want to find deep insights for kind of how to move forward. And we use AI to help support that and to visualize our thinking so that we can take some next steps and hopefully solve some of these challenges in the world, you know? And it's also an exploration into what it means to be a human being.
How did you come up with the idea that AI could provide this very human capacity to help us connect?
It's really the real-time component that was the realization, oh my goodness, it was actually an idea that I had been exploring for many years as, a dialogue coach and someone who already was bringing people together around whatever their problems of practice were. As an educator, I was working in the field of education.
This episode is brought to you by Start With Values. If you'd like to reduce stress and increase fulfillment in your work and life, then check out startwithvalues.com. There, you'll be able to download the Values app, which helps you to discover your core values and bring them to life through micro habits. There is a values course so that you can learn about the science and practice of core values, and you'll be able to pre-register for my forthcoming book called Start With Values. I hope that these tools will enable you to achieve more fulfillment and make more meaningful decisions on your journey of life. Now back to the episode.
And I had been trained in coaching in different models, and I had been kind of going over this idea of like, if we could just visualize, because there's so much literature around the visual and what it can do for us. And so I had asked, many people and explored this for many years of how could we do this where we could visualize in real time what people are thinking, saying, their challenges, bringing, and try to balance polarities that were in the room and managing those and realizing, there's actually multiple perspectives around any issue. And so it was like kind of a flash of lightning, an insight that came one day when, my colleague who you've met, my co-founder, Chris Jones, was talking about AI and what he was doing with AI. And we kind of had this realization, the technology is at our fingertips for what we want to do around solving these human problems. And so that was really where that came from.
So interesting how the convergence of what you are doing and the technology is suddenly at a point where it can support this. It can create some amazing multipolar imagery. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more. What does multipolar thinking actually mean? Where most of the people out there will have heard of polarities, but there's more than just dark and light. Perhaps you could share with us. what it means.
Right. So a lot of people are very familiar with the term of polarity thinking, and that there are, two sides to every story, or that you're managing poles in an organization or around an issue. And the idea is multarity thinking, which is, a trademarked term about bringing the multiple perspectives and seeing those in one system and embracing those, and not just managing, but embracing the multarity of thoughts, ideas, opinions, viewpoints that exist around any issue. And it's really a deeper look. It's a broader look than just the kind of narrow thinking that is binary, right? And then, we've found some very interesting intersections also with design thinking. And we're actually just kind of in the beginning stages of bringing that also, and creating product around how do we honor those intersections as well, which has empathy at the, throughout this, but also just at the core, at the beginning of a design thinking model is empathy. And what we've found through this process of multarity thinking is that 100% of our use cases and the case studies that we've done so far and the initial research is that every time there's reporting that they grow in empathy, the participants grow in empathy for the other perspectives that exist around this issue. And so it really is also about getting out of ourselves. And if we're going to tackle any of these issues in the world, we have to be able to do that.
And the process that you've created, and I've been through a version of the process. It's really interesting because it seems to give people the space to lower their guard or drop down some barriers and express themselves freely. And at the end, you create some imagery that represents all of these different perspectives. And it was really interesting. Perhaps you could talk us through the process, what actually happens when people engage with Multarity Project.
Yeah. I mean, really, there are kind of 3 steps that that we've gone through. That is, the very 30,000-foot view of it, that kind of creating the space where people feel comfortable to, to be vulnerable, because especially when you're talking about issues that are very close to your heart, or sharing your personal experiences, in order to get really deep, you have to be able to access some level of vulnerability, right?
Yes.
And so creating the space is the first piece. And it is that container building that helps us, really get in the mindset, like preparing the mindset for it, right? And then we add in the symbols, the symbology of the AI is actually listening for tonality, emotional, where the person is emotionally, listening to voice inflection as well as the actual words, and it is, a psychological experience where you are going through, and or the AI actually is, pretty powerful in that way, listening for commonalities and differences, but also emotional context, which is pretty powerful, I think. And taking that and then creating symbology for it. So, and that's where we see people begin to have real insights and go, oh, wow, that actually means something different to me, or I now understand you better.
In some ways, you could almost suggest that the AI is more emotionally intelligent than the other humans because it's so present and it's so tuned in to what each person is saying. I mean, we're not saying that it has emotions, but it has emotional intelligence because it's picking up on voice tone I don't know if it can actually observe the videos of the participants. Is that possible? Or is it focusing
You
mostly
know
on
what?
words?
We haven't experimented with that. If it's like looking at but I mean, I know that there are things that are saying, what is the person's, facial
Mm.
face doing? We do not have that as a piece.
Okay.
It's a good idea
Yet.
though.
Yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Those
Yeah. And,
little.
I mean, we've taken every step of it with like, what are all of the ethical considerations all
Mhm.
along the way as well?
Yes.
How are we dealing with any bias that might show up? Uh,
Yes.
it's, I mean, we've taken it in a very, thoughtful and ordered way
Yeah.
where we're trying to make sure that, uh, we're keeping the human at the center of it because that is, we're in the business of humans that we, uh, realize that any change that's going to happen uh, has to be done through the internal work that we are doing as human
Mm.
beings, right? And so
Mhm.
that's just a tool. It's part of the way that we're, the tools that we're using to help us, but it really is the human showing up and doing the work too.
Yes. What are some of the use cases? Who do you serve?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The people who are interesting or who are interested in this work and who comes to the table, because that's, the first step is that you have to want to do it. So as far as, I mean, we have actually a couple of different buckets of what that falls into because we do these public sessions where it's anybody come from all over and people have come from all over the world, 6 continents that we've had people represented, and they come all ages
Hmm.
from, teenagers through to their, I think maybe the eldest was close to 80. Um, I'd have to go back and double check that, but we've had, all generations, all persuasions, anybody who, all kind of frames of mind, political affiliations,
Mm.
all religious backgrounds. And so it's really been a very diverse group. And that was our goal in the beginning is like, how can we get the most diverse perspectives around one table to talk about these issues, right?
Yeah.
So that has been very diverse. And then we've also worked with, affinity groups or that they have some kind of like component, whether they work at the same organization or a group that's interested in exploring something in particular that's important to them. And so, I mean, we see a lot of use in education has been an important one. We've been recently working with a school community in Ukraine, which really there are, few spots harder on the planet right now
Hmm.
to be in.
Yeah.
And they're taking on, some really important issues in their community for how they create a space of belonging and support in their community during a time of crisis. So that's one. We've got a lot of emerging interest around mental health, victim services, as far as like uh, domestic violence or other kind of mental health support.
Hmm.
We've got some interesting intersections with youth advocacy and then conflict resolution, which we actually call conflict evolution, with what we're
Oh,
doing. And so
nice.
we've created a workshop around conflict evolution because we see conflict as a resource and not something to be afraid of, not something to resolve, but to use as, um, a way for us to actually create and find solutions that couldn't have been imagined before.
How can AI help with mental health in your experience? What are some ways that it can support
Yeah.
us?
Well, what we're finding is that this symbology is you know really powerful of someone being able to. It's almost like so much with any challenge that we face as human beings, when we talk and talk and talk and talk, we miss things, but when we see it come to life in some kind of visual representation, it adds this component that helps people attach meaning to it, but also see unique possibilities. And so there's a lot that we feel is more on the horizon for us in relation to that than, then I can point to this person said this and this person said that. We have testimonials about it. But it's really comes down to that, the symbols and the artwork that's created based on someone's emotional experience and how they're exploring an idea. So it's been fascinating.
It is fascinating. And having participated in the session about resilience, some of the imagery that was produced was really quite amazing. And it's incredible how the tool can produce quite different imagery from one conversation that gives you a lot to think about. I mean, some of the images, I remember talking during the session about the monkey mind, and it almost created this visual of evolution and of these minds and eventually a person, and one with this waterfall of information coming through their minds. It just encourages you to step back and reconsider the perspectives, which I suppose that's the real point. It opens up that empathy portal. You see what other people were perhaps seeing, plus more. There was that one image of the person lying on the floor, but a beam of light pouring through the window, which symbolizes that hope. It was very powerful.
Yeah. And I remember it was such a delight having you in that session too, with your perspective on resilience and, actually even people reached out afterwards and said, how powerful it was. And that imagery, I remember that one about the monkey mind, and it's on the website if, your listeners want to go see it.
We'll share a link.
Because that was also, it was like it came up in a couple of places, and then, but when it then shows up in the imagery as well, I think people think about it in a deeper way and they go, what does that really mean? And the different symbols that come up from the different pieces have been shared. And then to see those symbols in concert with somebody else's thoughts and feelings and points of view is also really powerful. And you can see someone who is maybe very different from me, has a different background, different perspective, but our ideas live together. It's kind of beautiful.
It is. In your experience, imagine that you have a group that comes to you and they have some kind of conflict or challenge and they want to evolve. How would they use that imagery? Do you think it's something that they could use as a vision board, or would it be a reference point? What would be the optimal way to use these images that represent the conversation that we've just had?
Well, we've had one person who has come to multiple sessions specifically around mental health. And she actually has told us that she keeps those images on her phone as a reminder for certain, and has them time to pop up so that at certain times when she knows she might be using, needing that as a reference point or, source of empowerment or strength. And, but also to see how they evolve over time is also a pretty interesting experiment as well.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Some people have, printed them out or, just to have them around as a reminder. So that's interesting. Some people use them as screensavers, that kind of thing. And now we're looking at, as we look at different kind of product development, what does that look like for people?
You mentioned being a dialogue coach. What does a dialogue coach actually do?
Yeah. Well, it's actually facilitation too, and, the being trained in bringing a group together, but then to facilitate some kind of protocol or conversation and interaction that, might be challenging or isn't designed to help somebody think deeper about something. I totally believe that we're all prepared. We are like precisely prepared for whatever our next moment is, And I feel like all of that training led me to, okay, here you go. This is now your life purpose.
It's amazing how it can unfold in unexpected ways. The dots
Yeah.
connect if you've been following your passion and your curiosity. Sometimes you look back and go, oh, wow, all of those steps, while seemingly disjointed and disconnected, really make sense when you find the
Yeah.
thing.
Right. Right. And you
Mm.
can see what seemingly disparate things were, oh yeah, that's part of the path,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
emotional intelligence and empathy has obviously been at the core of your work for a long time. Any tips
Hmm.
for people who maybe are struggling to understand others? Because we do live in this polarized world. In fact, it's a multipolar world. Any
Yeah.
tips for people to activate empathy or build empathy?
Certainly. And I think the important first step is like that you want to do it, right? That
Mm,
you think that it's important that we build a more empathetic world, because if people don't believe that understanding someone else's perspective has any importance in the world, then it's going to be hard to take any, second, third, or fourth step in that. So that's number one, is like being willing to come to the table, to hear another person's perspective. And you have to be open to that, right? I mean, it's a huge step in getting people to come to be in the room with someone who they know they're going to disagree with. And
yeah.
I think the important thing in our work is that we're not trying to change opinions. We're not trying to change anybody's mind. It is really about understanding yourself deeper and being open to the idea that other people can have their perspective too. And we can find solutions together. So that's number one, is like just being able to come to the table. And then there is, I mean, if you're not willing to do that, to begin to question the sources of information that you have, and realizing that there are a lot of multiple opinions out there. And sometimes in a polarized world, we only hear or listen or seek out sources of information that confirm whatever it is that we feel.
Mhm, mhm.
That's confirmation bias. And if we're going to get beyond binary thinking, we have to be open to the fact that other people are allowed to have their opinions, right? Um, so questioning those sources and seeking out other sources, even if they contrast with your opinion, and that's okay. It actually makes us more informed. It allows us to be able to, make better decisions, and to navigate some of these hard waters in a way that helps us be better policymakers.
Mhm.
One organization that we're starting to work with is involved in government and policy, and that is one that we have to be able to come to the table
Yeah.
about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially right now, it's becoming more and more important for our leaders to be able to adopt multiple perspectives and really understand the people that they're serving. Because
Right.
without that, we're just following ideologies or dogma or what we think
Hmm.
other people want us to say, which is even worse than just
Yeah.
being
Right.
authentic
Right.
in a way.
And
Mm,
I mean, I've been reading a lot of research around kind of like what is going to be necessary in the future, and all the thing that consistently rises to the top is that as human beings, we're going to need to be able to think flexibly.
yeah.
And, uh, binary thinking is the opposite of flexibility.
Mhm.
And, it's that kind of rigor mortis, which ends in one thing, you know, and and so that flexibility and the malleability in our thinking is going to be it's going to be a priority for us as human beings. And so creating programs where children can think flexibly, where those kind of ideas are honored in multiple perspectives, in spaces where we're going to have to make decisions, where jobs are going to change pretty rapidly in the next decade. We're going to see many jobs go away and many new jobs are going to need to be formed. And so if we can't think flexibly, if we can't think in multiple perspectives, in what we call multarity thinking, we're going to be at a disadvantage.
There's so much value in capturing all of these different perspectives that people have. And I don't know if perhaps it's just me, but I love riding the waves of lots of different perspectives. But I suppose some people are less open to this. It's that cognitive flexibility, as you say. It's that being willing to open all of these different doors and have a look and go, wow, there's actually wisdom in there, and there's actually experience there, and there's reasons why that person says that thing that I find infuriating, but I'm still going to open the door and ride that wave. I wonder what some of the steps are to enable someone to actually just develop the curiosity to be more flexible.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the word curiosity, like to be curious that, there's something else out there, that we don't know, and we don't know what we don't know. And so that state of curiosity, and actually it's so, like we said before, it's everything kind of prepares you for the next step. Curiosity is something that I've been writing about and exploring and researching about for decades. And it's something that needs to be nurtured. I mean, we are born with it. If you watch any baby or toddler, young child, they are naturally curious, but somehow, through our systems, we tend to that goes away. It gets diminished, and we need to continue to nurture it as we grow, and as adults as well.
I saw a video, and the statistics may or may not be accurate, but it did ring true. And it said that at age 5 or something like that, 90% of kids or thereabout would qualify as being a genius. And by the time they finished school, it's only 3%. So what's happened in the interim is that we've basically taken away a lot of that curiosity, or discouraged it, rigid thinking, follow the rules, you get scored. What do you think the future of education might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has to begin to open more opportunities for us to, learn to question, to be questioning constantly, to be okay with not knowing the answer, and I think more and more we're seeing that in education, where, kids are given more entrepreneurial opportunities, it is evolving and changing. So I think we're going to have to do that if we are going to have a society where people are not just fulfilled, which is totally what we want to do, but we don't want to we want to find meaning, in what we're doing, and contribute back to the world in some way, right?
Yeah, now you're definitely talking my language. I've been so immersed in the study of values and finding meaning and fulfillment for the past few months, preparing for my next book. From your perspective, what are some of those ingredients for fulfillment? Do you think it is really aligning our actions with our values?
Well, I for certain, I think it is. And I think there's I think fulfillment gets gets twisted a little bit in some realms, because people take it as, oh, that person is just, being hedonistic or selfish, that they're
Yeah.
making choices for their life that are just for them. And I think that's, very short-sighted way of looking at it about attaching meaning and creating meaning. And I think that comes from when you give back to the world in some way, that you find that that's where real fulfillment comes from,
Yeah.
is when, it's not just a child saying, well, I just want to play video games all day. And their parent says, oh, okay, well, that's what makes you happy. Then do that, but, but
Exactly.
really about like, how can I contribute? And not that that's a bad thing I'm not saying gaming is a bad thing, but that in some way, when we're finding vocation, that we're
Mm.
in some way giving back
Yeah.
and creating something that has impact somewhere else,
It's
beyond
super
just ourselves.
it's super aligned with what I propose in the book, which is that
Mhm.
and I'll share this with you, of course, for the future, and it's for a future episode for those listening. But I've crafted a pyramid structure, which is similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But what I've tried to do is integrate modern neuroscience and neurophysiology. So the base layer is a survival layer, because our survival values will always undercut our, more aspirational values. Or if for me, creativity, kindness, peace are strong core values, but some of those are right at the top of this pyramid. So you've got the survival layer, because it's always there and we have to honor that. You've got the belonging layer, because for most of us, having some sense of belonging is important to the rest of our life, to fully functioning. Then a growth layer, where we master new skills and curiosity and we learn.
Mhm.
An impact layer, where we have status, recognition, accomplishment. And then at the top, fulfillment. And in the fulfillment layer, it really is all about service. It's about legacy. It's about awe, experiencing awe. It's about
Yeah.
supporting others. And I really feel like when you've got a structure like that, fulfillment makes sense. It's not hedonistic. It's really about having
Yeah.
mastered skills, had an impact. And it's that moment where you step back and go, okay, it's no longer about the money. And you see this with many philanthropists. Actually,
Yes.
I've achieved impact. Now I just want to give back. I want to mentor others. I want to support people.
Yeah. I
Mm.
love that.
Yeah, I'll share it with you in its draft.
Sounds
Well, it's
good.
not draft anymore. This is happening. It's interesting.
Yeah.
How do you feel AI will become integrated into our lives? Because for me, ChatGPT 4.40 is just, I would really miss it if it was taken away from me. It's such a key partner in my brainstorming, in my thinking. I've even used it to rehearse for podcasts before, where I say,
Mhm.
test my knowledge, and give me feedback on what I could do better, using the voice feature.
Nice.
And it's incredible. How do you see AI evolving in how it supports us and is integrated?
Yeah. I read an article this morning actually that said, within a couple of years, there really won't be people who aren't using it on a daily basis in the workplace, right?
Yeah.
That
Mm.
almost every and which is why also universities and businesses are having to come up with AI policies, right? Uh, because people are so now figuring out it's not just especially people who are using it from the beginning, that people are beginning to see that, oh, there could be something more here if I go a little deeper. It's not just saying, help me with my math homework, or
Mm.
write this email for me. People are starting to use it as a personal exploration,
Yeah.
and a self education tool of like, what am I missing? And I think that is a really powerful use to say, like, read what I wrote. What am I missing? Or am I being biased? Like, to begin to use it as a self regulation tool is pretty fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
And that is helping us grow as human beings,
Mm.
right? That and almost everybody that I knew was using it, early on from the, when ChatGPT first became kind of publicly available, who have continued to use it say that any of that kind of rudimentary use is long gone for them, and that it really is about finding, their humanity in it too. It's a space for reflection. It's a
Yeah.
place for personal growth. So we can't tell the future, but I have a feeling that it is just I think that it's, gonna continue to surprise us in
Yeah.
how we're able to use it as human beings.
It's definitely far beyond the days, for me anyway, of, help me write an email about blah, blah, blah. I mean, that was
Right.
fun for a little while, but now it's kind of based on your knowledge of neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. How can we combine these three concepts? And it's probably giving the AI some work that it hasn't done before, because some of the topics are quite obscure, and it will really come back with something interesting and research based, if you wish, or quite philosophical, if you wish. And it's, for me, I find it such an enjoyable experience.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Where do you think the and we don't have a crystal ball. We could ask ChatGPT, but where do you think the technology goes? Do you think we might all end up with Neuralink implants to access the information as quickly as possible, or is that scary from your perspective?
I think it is scary for a lot of people. I don't think that it's happening right now. I think it's, it could be a generation or two away, but
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing. It depends on how integrated it is. Does it because we're pretty integrated with technology already. A mobile
Yeah.
phone is never more than a meter away from most people, so
Yeah.
it's kind of integrated. It's just another step closer. It'll be really
Yeah.
interesting.
I know someone who's kind of involved in that, developing them Neuralink, but not as an implant. And I don't think it's going to be as accessible in the same way that when I was a kid, the word on the street was we were all going to be flying cars,
Yeah.
you know, uh, and that was, 50 years ago, and we're still driving our cars there. And it's more, driver assist than driverless, right?
Yeah.
And so we're using all these things to assist us. And I think that's going to continue. But I think we still have a lot of humanity in us, that's my hope anyway.
No, definitely. Yeah. And we've always used and adopted tools, and then they become almost invisible, like electricity. It helps us so much, but we don't spend much time thinking about the mechanics of it or what it's doing as it travels along power lines and so forth. It's just there.
Right. And, I'm sure there's people who say, well, we shouldn't have developed electricity, or,
Probably.
we shouldn't have use that so widely or whatever. But for the most part, people are happy that we have it, it's, and so I think, there's something in every generation, some new technology that people that are initially afraid of, but that we end up embracing and saying, how can we harness this? It doesn't mean we don't have to be careful of, solving for climate change still,
Mm-hmm. I've heard some
even though we're
interesting.
using electricity.
Well, absolutely. And I've heard some interesting perspectives on the purpose of humanity. Some suggest that we are a cocoon for technology, and perhaps
Mm.
we birth these technologies and it's happening across the universe, and then the technologies surpass us and go on to populate other planets. Do you have any
Mm.
particular thoughts around, what is our purpose as humanity? It's a big question,
As
and I
you
didn't prepare you for that one.
Wow. Ah. Well, I hope that our purpose is to love, like
Mm,
I would hope that to love each other and create space for us to grow together would be at the core of what purpose is. And I think purpose is also a very individual journey.
yeah, it is. It is.
So,
What have been some of the milestones that have brought you fulfillment over the years? You've done some amazing things, including a wonderful TEDx presentation, which we'll include in the show notes. But what has brought you fulfillment?
thank you. Yeah, those and actually there are two TEDx talks now published. So I'll make sure that you have the second
Thank
link
you.
because the second one is actually I love it. It's called The Power of Multarity Thinking. And I think TED actually published it as Rethinking Your Beliefs. But certain milestones have been, getting into writing was enormous for me. Having children was, shifts everything. Um, I think always anybody who's a parent can
Yeah.
say, it was like their life was before and after children, and how it just impacts your perspective on the world. Just, you know, when you first have a baby and you see a child walking,
Mm.
and you go, oh my gosh, how does that ever happen?
Yes.
And you just look at the world in a different way, right?
Yeah.
So, children, travel. I've spent, years, decades working overseas and in different countries and working with different kinds of organizations all over the world. And that perspective has shifted me in a major way, um, opened me to possibilities that I didn't know existed. Uh, a few major losses have been important milestones in my life to get me to think differently or have a different perspective about the way that I think, the way that I interact in the world. Writing and publishing, having books published of mine were huge milestones. Uh, and then now this journey is enormous as well.
What are some of the books that people can find that you've
Of
written?
mine,
Yeah, of yours.
yeah. Yeah. Actually, the thing I'm most excited about my writing these days, because I have written widely on creativity and nurturing children with creativity. One book, and it's actually not in print anymore. It's called Child of Wonder, but you can still find it on Amazon and
Hmm.
different places. And I think there's an ebook version that's still published. Uh, and a couple of other things around like using social media in schools and education. But I have been writing for Brains magazine over the last couple of years. So there's writing there about multarity thinking and
Okay.
some other things. But what I'm most excited about with my writing is that I write poetry. And it's just super fun exploration into language and words. And we're working on a multarity thinking book. So that's in process. So
I look
really that's kind of it'll come and I'll let you know.
I look forward to
But
it. I look forward to it.
yeah. Yeah. So
You
that's a
mentioned
neat one.
creativity in children. Any thoughts before we wrap up? So many of our viewers and listeners have kids. I have a 10-year-old, and nurturing that creativity is really important to me. Any tools or tips or suggestions?
Yes.
Yeah.
For certain. Um I have a whole like 300-page book on that. However, I think the things that kind of like surface and come to the top around that is, uh, you know, not shutting kids down in their thinking and telling them what's right, but instead reevaluating as parents how we question and how we encourage a child's questions, especially in that age where you mentioned like that 5-year range. That's the year that kids often are starting formal school.
Yeah.
And it's an and I worked in education for decades. And so I'm kind of keenly aware of what happens when kids go to school and why is it that seems to be correlated, that their questioning changes, their affect changes of how they explore ideas. And so that being open to those explorations and allowing kids to have their own opinions about things and not necessarily put our opinions on them, but instead, like, tell me more about that. And what are you wondering about that? And really looking at how we encourage their questions to continue so that they continue to stay curious. When my eldest was very little, the kids kept a book called their own question book. And it was just a place where we would just write questions down, and not having the answer to every question kind of is very freeing in your mind, that you don't always have to know. And the person you're asking it doesn't have to have the answer either,
I love that. Absolutely. Any thoughts on changing your beliefs? When you mentioned the topic of your next TED Talk, how does someone change a belief? Because it can be so liberating to let go of these limiting beliefs.
It's so interesting because when they retitled the talk, because it was originally submitted as The Power of Multarity Thinking, and they retitled it as How to Rethink Your Beliefs. And I initially went, no, that's not what the talk is about. Like I don't want to change anybody's belief. But then I thought about it and I was like, actually, it's okay. It's not about changing your belief system, but enriching your understanding. And so kind of rethinking our belief system I've embraced it as a title because it is more about like, how do I enrich my belief system by understanding what other people feel about it too? And realizing that there's so much more on the opposite of what I believe that might help me even have a better understanding of my own self and my own understanding of this issue. In that talk, I'm highlighting specifically the topic of tribalism and looking at the multarities in tribalism. And there are things that people find that the multarities and that are like the multiple polarities that exist inside of this concept of tribalism are actually totally opposite of each other. But what we realize is actually, I believe this can be true and this other thing can be true at the same time. And so it gives you kind of a more nuanced understanding than changing you. You know what I mean?
Yes, that's fascinating. So 2 or 3 things can be true when viewed from different angles and perspectives. So it's important.
And how much power is in that, right?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And when I think about a tribe, I was writing about this recently, there would have been many different perspectives within a tribe, and we needed that. And I take it back to values, but some people valued freedom and curiosity, get out there, let's explore the environment, where some necessarily valued safety. And we needed that too, because someone had to stay back with the group. And some would have valued nurturing, and some would have valued, I don't know, a little bit of aggression to protect us from marauding tribes or whatever. Like, you actually needed all of these different perspectives on reality.
Right. And it gives us a better understanding and a deeper appreciation of the diversity that exists in our world as well,
Yeah.
And that just because someone believes that doesn't make them wrong or bad.
We just have to understand
Yeah.
and respect. I guess that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Wow, Ginger, another 1 hour conversation. Appreciate your time so much. If people would like
Yeah.
to connect with you and find out more about the work that you're doing, what would you like them to do?
Yeah. Multarityproject.com is our website. And I'm also always available through my personal website is gingercarlson.com. But we always are, inviting people into the Multarity Project to become partners with us if they want. I mean, we've got a couple of, wide variety of organizations that we're beginning to partner with, and looking at how we can, change and impact the future of dialogue in the world.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Any final thoughts for people out there?
I love doing this. It's so much fun to, dive into these ideas. And I thank you so much for inviting me and having another fantastic conversation.
I feel there'll be
Thanks for
many
what you're
more.
doing in the world. Yes, certainly.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode. Check out the links in the show notes.